This movie didn't bend the rules. It ignored them. Then it dared the system to stop it. Scenes collapsed. Actors vanished. Executives panicked behind closed doors. What looked like a reckless comedy was actually a controlled detonation. Every joke was loaded. Every decision carried risk. These are the strange, uncomfortable, and often overlooked stories behind Blazing Saddles. And by the time it was finished, even the people who helped build Hollywood weren't sure what they had unleashed. Buckle in. This story doesn't ease you in. It drops you straight into the chaos. Number 1. The casting that collapsed on day 1. On the very first day of filming, the production nearly imploded. The role of the Waco Kid had already been cast. The studio felt safe. They had chosen experience, prestige, and a familiar Hollywood face. Gig Young was an Academy Award winner, respected, trusted, predictable. But the moment the cameras rolled, something was wrong. His hands wouldn't stop shaking. His voice fractured mid-line. Then, without warning, he collapsed inside the jail cell set. At first, the crew thought it was part of the act. It wasn't. Young was in the middle of severe alcohol withdrawal. What the studio hadn't seen behind closed doors now unfolded in front of everyone. Within hours, he was removed from the film entirely. Day 1. No backup plan. No margin for error. Mel Brooks didn't call a meeting. He didn't consult executives. He walked away from the set and made a single phone call. Gene Wilder. No audition. No script discussion. Just one quiet question. Can you be on a plane tomorrow? Wilder didn't hesitate. He didn't ask what kind of movie this was. He simply said, yes. By the next morning, he was on set. Jet-lagged, unprepared, thrown into a role that would define the entire film. And from the moment he appeared on screen, the chaos found its balance. The Waco Kid wasn't saved by planning. He was saved by instinct. Number 2. The voice that never left the movie. Before a single frame was shot, Blazing Saddles already had teeth. That came from Richard Pryor. Mel Brooks didn't bring him in to soften the script. He brought him in to sharpen it. Pryor didn't rewrite jokes. He rewired the movie's nervous system. His humor wasn't polite. It didn't ask permission. It cut straight through hypocrisy and left the wound exposed. Brooks wanted more than his words. He wanted Pryor on screen. Not because Pryor was funny, but because he made people uneasy before they laughed. That scared the studio. They didn't see a visionary comedian. They saw headlines. They saw unpredictability. They saw risk they couldn't control. So they shut it down quietly. Pryor was removed before casting was finalized. No announcement. No confrontation. The lead role went to Cleavon Little, and Little was flawless. Smooth, controlled, magnetic. He delivered every line with precision and confidence. But something important stayed behind. The rhythm of the jokes. The bite beneath the comedy. The danger hiding inside the laughter. That was still Pryor. He didn't wear the badge. He didn't ride the horse. But the movie moved to his cadence from beginning to end. Every uncomfortable pause. Every line that landed a second later than expected. Every moment where laughter caught in the throat. Pryor wasn't erased. He was absorbed. Blazing Saddles didn't just borrow his voice. It ran on it. Number 3. The screening that almost killed the film. The first time the studio executives saw Blazing Saddles, no one laughed. Not because the jokes failed, but because they worked too well. The room stayed silent as the film rolled. Arms crossed. Faces locked. What they saw wasn't a Western. It wasn't even a comedy. It was racial satire with no safety rails. Sex jokes without apology. Violence played for absurdity. Language that refused to soften itself. To the executives, this wasn't bold. It was professional suicide. When the credits ended, the reaction wasn't debate. It was fear. The plan was simple. Kill it quietly. Bury it. Pretend it never happened. No wide release. No marketing push. No explanation. Mel Brooks didn't argue about the jokes. He didn't rewrite scenes. He made one request. Let a real audience see it. Just once. No edits. No notice. No filters. The executives agreed, not because they believed in the film, but because they assumed the audience would confirm their fears. The test screening began. For the first 20 minutes, nothing happened. No laughter. No gasps. Just an uncomfortable stillness. The executives felt vindicated. Then came a campfire. A group of cowboys. Beans. Silence. And then one sound. Crude. Loud. Unmistakable. The theater exploded. Laughter tore through the room like a release valve snapping open. People doubled over. Hands hit armrests. Tears formed. That single moment did something the satire hadn't yet done. It gave the audience permission. From there, the laughter didn't stop. It built. Scene after scene. Risk after risk. By the end, the same executives who wanted the film erased were staring at something they couldn't ignore. The movie hadn't failed. It had just needed a spark. And the most dangerous film in the room was saved by the dumbest joke imaginable. Number 4. The joke that unlocked the room. It wasn't clever. It wasn't subtle. And it wasn't supposed to be historic. A group of cowboys sat around a campfire. They were eating beans. Nothing else was happening. Then one of them let it rip. No music cue. No build-up. Just a loud, wet, unapologetic sound. Then another. Then another. What followed wasn't polite laughter. It was chaos. The audience didn't just laugh. They broke. People leaned forward. Others slapped their knees. Some wiped tears from their faces. In that moment, the spell was shattered. Up until then, the crowd had been cautious, unsure if they were allowed to laugh, unsure what kind of movie this was asking them to watch. That single sound made the rules clear. Nothing here was sacred. Nothing was off limits. What mattered wasn't the joke itself. It was what the joke did. It lowered the audience's defenses. It told them this movie wasn't judging them. It wasn't asking them to be smart. It was asking them to let go. From that point on, the satire landed harder. The racial commentary cut deeper. The absurdity felt intentional instead of reckless. Executives later admitted that moment changed everything, not because it was funny, but because it gave the film momentum. Blazing Saddles didn't survive because it was tasteful. It survived because it was fearless. And sometimes, the fastest way into a complicated idea is through the simplest, dumbest sound imaginable. Number 5. Gene Wilder's rule that changed everything. When Mel Brooks called Gene Wilder, it wasn't just a casting decision. It was a rescue operation. Wilder agreed immediately, but he had one condition. If he was going to do this, he wasn't going to play it for laughs. No mugging, no exaggerated reactions, no winking at the camera. He wanted to play the Waco Kid straight. Mel Brooks didn't hesitate. That choice quietly became the film's secret weapon. While the rest of the movie leaned into chaos, Wilder did the opposite. He moved slowly. He spoke softly. He barely reacted at all. His performance wasn't loud. It was restrained. And that restraint created contrast. Surrounded by absurdity, the Waco Kid felt almost tragic. A washed-up gunslinger hiding in a jail cell. Drunk, broken, past his prime. Wilder delivered some of the film's funniest lines without ever smiling. He didn't chase laughs. He let them catch up to him. That calm, deadpan presence grounded the madness. It gave the satire weight. It made the jokes sharper by refusing to underline them. The Waco Kid wasn't just comic relief. He was a reminder that behind all the noise, there was still a real person standing there, watching the world spin out of control. And without that quiet center, Blazing Saddles might have collapsed under its own chaos. Number 6. The battle with the censors. Before the movie ever reached audiences, it had to survive another enemy. The censors. They weren't amused. They weren't impressed. They were alarmed. Entire pages of the script were flagged. Racial slurs, sex jokes, religious satire, Nazi references. To them, this wasn't comedy. It was a career-ending mistake. One warning was delivered without subtlety. If this version is released, you'll never work again. Mel Brooks didn't negotiate line by line. He didn't offer compromises. He made one argument and never changed it. If you remove the edge, you remove the point. Every joke that made the censors uncomfortable was there for a reason. Not to shock, but to expose. Brooks understood something the system didn't. Polite satire gets ignored. Safe satire gets forgotten. This movie wasn't designed to comfort. It was designed to confront. Even the opening insult, the first words spoken on screen, became a battlefield. Days of debate, threats of removal, endless notes. Brooks refused to dull the blade. Because once you start sanding down a film like this, you don't end up with something cleaner. You end up with something empty. What survived the censorship process wasn't a toned-down version of the movie. It was the movie. Sharp, offensive to some, impossible to ignore. And that refusal to apologize became part of its DNA. Number 7. The role that came with a price. Cleavon Little made history the moment he stepped into the role. He wasn't just the lead of Blazing Saddles. He was one of the first black actors to headline a major Hollywood comedy. On screen, he was effortless, confident, controlled, untouchable. Off-screen, it was a different story. During production, letters began arriving. Not fan mail, hate mail, slurs, threats, warnings disguised as advice. Some viewers couldn't separate satire from reality. They didn't see a character exposing racism, they saw a target. Mel Brooks later admitted the studio never prepared Little for that reality. They celebrated the risk on paper. They ignored the cost it would place on the person carrying it. Little never brought it to set. He never asked for protection. He never adjusted his performance. Instead, he leaned further into control. Every line delivered with calm authority. Every reaction measured. Never flinching. Blazing Saddles mocked racism openly, but in doing so, it forced its star to confront it privately. And the fact that Cleavon Little made it look effortless was its own act of courage. Number 8. The moment that would never happen today. One of the film's most shocking gags lasts only seconds. A cowboy walks up to a horse, raises his fist, and knocks it out cold. There was no camera trick, no clever cut, no visual effect. It was real. A trained horse, a choreographed strike, a single swing, one take. Today, the scene would be impossible. Animal welfare laws, public outrage, instant cancellation. But in the 1,970 seconds, the rules were looser, and Mel Brooks was testing how far the line could move. The moment wasn't just about shock, it was about escalation. After that punch, the audience understood something clearly. Nothing was protected, nothing was safe. The film had crossed into cartoon logic, a place where realism didn't matter, only intent. Brooks later admitted it felt like a dare, not to the audience, but to the system itself. Can we really get away with this? They did. And that single moment became proof that Blazing Saddles wasn't interested in playing fair. Number 9. A villain built from real grudges. Hedley Lamar wasn't just a character, he was payback. Mel Brooks modeled the villain after a real Hollywood executive. A man obsessed with titles, quick to take credit, slow to deliver results. Brooks never named him publicly. He didn't need to. Anyone who had worked in the system knew exactly who was being mocked. Harvey Korman leaned into the role without restraint. The arrogance, the fake intelligence, the endless self-importance. Lamar wasn't dangerous because he was smart. He was dangerous because he thought he was. He couldn't remember names. He mangled language. He confused authority with competence. And when he shouted, "It's Hedley," it wasn't just a punchline. It was Mel Brooks reminding Hollywood that the people pulling the strings were often the least capable of understanding the art they controlled. The villain wasn't exaggerated. He was familiar. Number 10. The man who didn't know it was a comedy? Slim Pickens had spent his life in westerns. Real ones. He rode horses for a living, spoke with a natural drawl, carried himself like someone who actually belonged on the frontier. When he was cast in Blazing Saddles, no one explained the joke to him. Mel Brooks didn't correct that. Pickens showed up believing he was in a serious western, and that misunderstanding became priceless. He delivered every line with absolute sincerity. No irony, no exaggeration, no awareness of the absurdity around him. Fart jokes, explosions, characters breaking logic and tone. Pickens reacted to all of it like it was gospel truth. That contrast grounded the madness. While everyone else pushed the comedy forward, he anchored it in authenticity. He never winked at the audience, never broke character, never questioned the insanity unfolding around him. In a movie built on chaos, Slim Pickens was the straight line that made the curve visible. And sometimes, the best comedy comes from someone who has no idea they're part of the joke. Number 11. The explosion that almost went too far. One of the film's biggest laughs came dangerously close to disaster. A fake toll booth, a dynamite charge, a classic slapstick explosion. The plan was simple: detonate after the actors cleared the frame. On the day of filming, something went wrong. The charge fired early. Debris flew into the air seconds after the cast exited the shot. Close enough to feel it, close enough to stop breathing. No one was hurt, but no one laughed either. The set went silent. From that moment on, Mel Brooks changed the rules. Non-essential crew were banned from explosive scenes. Distances were increased. Safety margins widened. And still, the shot stayed in the movie. Because even when Blazing Saddles brushed against real danger, it refused to blink. The chaos on screen wasn't an illusion. Sometimes, it was earned. Number 12. The ending that confused everyone. The finale of Blazing Saddles doesn't resolve the story. It destroys it. Characters break the fourth wall. Fights spill into other movie sets. A Western collapses into a musical number. To the studio, it made no sense. Executives called it disconnected, pointless, a waste of time. Mel Brooks didn't explain himself. He filmed it anyway. Most of the sequence was improvised. The dancers barely rehearsed. The logic was stitched together in the editing room. And yet, it worked. Not because it was clean, but because it was honest. The ending wasn't about plot. It was about rejection. A rejection of genre. A rejection of structure. A rejection of the idea that movies needed to behave. When one executive finally asked, "Why do they leave the movie?" Brooks had his answer ready. Because it's over. And if you needed more explanation than that, you were never the audience this film was made for. Number 13. The question that said everything. After the final cut was screened, one executive stayed silent. No notice. No complaints. No praise. When the lights came up, he asked a single question. Why do they leave the movie? Mel Brooks didn't hesitate. Because it's over. That answer ended the conversation. The executive wasn't confused by the plot. He was confused by the idea. Movies weren't supposed to do this. They weren't supposed to expose their own machinery. They weren't supposed to walk off the set and refuse closure. But Blazing Saddles wasn't interested in comfort. That ending wasn't chaos for chaos's sake. It was a statement. If the film had spent 2 hours tearing down Western myths, why would it suddenly respect the rules of storytelling? The characters didn't ride into the sunset. They escaped the illusion. And the fact that some people never understood that moment only proved how necessary it was. Number 14. Mel Brooks stepped into the madness. Mel Brooks didn't just direct the film, he invaded it. He appeared in multiple roles. A clueless governor, a Yiddish-speaking Native American chief, a frantic Hollywood director inside the film's final breakdown. None of it was rehearsed the traditional way. Brooks would show up on set, put on a costume, scratch out lines moments before shooting. The performances felt unstable on purpose, like fragments from a fever dream. Each role mocked a different layer of power. Politicians who didn't understand responsibility, Hollywood figures who didn't understand art, systems that functioned on noise instead of thought. Brooks wasn't acting to disappear into character, he was acting to expose the machinery. By inserting himself everywhere, he made it impossible to ignore who was pulling the strings. And in a movie about breaking rules, the director becoming part of the chaos felt inevitable. Number 15. The success nobody wanted to reward. Blazing Saddles was a phenomenon. Audiences packed theaters. Quotes spread instantly. The film became a cultural lightning strike. Award season followed. 3 nominations, 0 wins. The Academy didn't reject the film openly. They simply didn't embrace it. The satire was too sharp, the language too raw, the message too uncomfortable to celebrate in public. Critics praised it, audiences loved it, but institutions hesitated. Mel Brooks later summed it up without bitterness. "They didn't give us Oscars," he said. "They gave us repeat business." And he was right. Trophies fade into shelves, but this movie didn't fade. Decades later, the laughs still echo. The discomfort still lands. The questions still sting. Blazing Saddles didn't need permission to matter. It survived without approval. Number 16. The sitcom that shouldn't exist. After the film became a hit, the studio saw opportunity. Not artistic opportunity. Financial opportunity. They tried to turn Blazing Saddles into a television sitcom. It was called Black Bart. Same basic setup, same characters, but everything dangerous was removed. No sharp language, no racial satire, no edge. What remained was hollow. The pilot was filmed, then quietly buried. Not because it failed, but because the studio wanted to keep control of the rights. Episodes were produced. None were aired. Even Mel Brooks refused to acknowledge it later. Because some stories don't survive dilution. Blazing Saddles worked because it hit hard. Once softened, it had nothing left to say. And turning it into a sitcom wasn't an expansion, it was a misunderstanding. Number 17. The title that made executives sweat. Before filming even began, the studio hated the title. Blazing Saddles, they argued, sounded obscene, suggestive, too risky. They pushed alternatives, safer names, forgettable ones. Mel Brooks laughed. "The title is the joke," he said. It was ridiculous on purpose, bold on purpose, Uncomfortable on purpose. Changing it would mean apologizing before the first frame rolled. The executives backed down, and the result was one of the most memorable titles in film history. Sometimes the thing that makes decision-makers nervous is exactly what audiences remember. Number 18. A movie that can't be remade. Years later, Mel Brooks was asked the same question again and again. Could Blazing Saddles be made today? His answer never changed. Not with that script, not with that language, not with that ending. The culture had shifted, the tolerance for risk had narrowed. But Brooks wasn't bitter. He understood something crucial. This movie belonged to its moment. It existed to break silence, not to comfort, to offend everyone equally, to force laughter where politeness had failed. That kind of satire only works once, and once it's done, it doesn't repeat. Number 19. A set where no one could stop laughing. Some scenes had to be filmed again and again, not because of mistakes, but because the crew couldn't keep it together. Camera operators laughed too loudly. Boom mics dipped into frame. Crew members ruined takes. At one point, Mel Brooks had to remove people from the set. "Stop enjoying the movie," he shouted. "We're still making it." That energy stayed in the film. You can feel it. Blazing Saddles wasn't just funny to watch. It was impossible to make without laughing. And that joy, chaotic and uncontrolled, became part of its texture. Number 20. The Duke Said No. Mel Brooks wanted the ultimate seal of approval. John Wayne. He offered him a cameo in the final chaos. Wayne read the script. "One page was enough. I love it," he said, "but I can't do it." Not because he disagreed with the movie, but because his audience wouldn't forgive him. Then he added something that mattered. "But I'll be first in line to see it." And he was. The King of Westerns showed up opening night. He didn't appear on screen, but his presence said everything. The genre had been dismantled, and even its greatest icon understood why. The horse who lived better than the cast. In a production full of chaos, one star had it easy. A horse. One of the lead stunt horses had its own trailer, padding, cooling fans, a personal handler. Meanwhile, actors changed behind curtains or shared cramped dressing rooms. Gene Wilder joked the horse lived better than he did. Mel Brooks didn't deny it. "That horse was a professional," he said. "It hit its marks. It listened. It never broke character." In a movie that mocked every Hollywood tradition, it felt fitting. The most well-treated performer was the one who never spoke a line. Blazing Saddles didn't just cross lines. It erased them. It mocked power, exposed hypocrisy, and dared audiences to laugh where silence once lived. No filters, no apologies, just comedy with nerve. And decades later, it still hasn't been replaced. Because some movies don't just break rules, they leave the room altogether. Video description long form, story-driven. Blazing Saddles wasn't just a comedy, it was a controlled explosion. Released in 1974, the film shattered Western tropes, mocked power, exposed racism, and terrified the very studio that financed it. Scenes collapsed. Actors were replaced overnight. Executives tried to bury it before audiences ever saw it. This video explores 20 hidden stories behind Blazing Saddles, from casting disasters and censorship battles to near-fatal stunts and an ending so bold it confused Hollywood itself. These aren't fun trivia facts. They're moments of risk, fear, defiance, and creative chaos that turned a reckless idea into one of the most dangerous comedies ever made. Some movies follow rules, others erase them. This is the story of one that walked out of the room entirely,